You all today. My name is Carlton Hall. I'm the CEO and founder of Carlton Hall Consulting. It is our great privilege to be working with the Department of Children, Youth, and Family Services to be able to provide and deliver a training series that's really intended to help support the great work that you all have been doing there in the state. But it's focused on looking at the tools, the foundational tools of prevention and prevention science, in order that we might be able to ensure that everybody is working with the same language, working from the same set of tools, looking forward to how we can engage and learn with and from each other for how those tools can then be applied to the work that you all are doing throughout the state in your varied counties. And so welcome. And we're grateful for the opportunity. I see some friends that I haven't seen for a little while. It's great to reconnect and looking forward to making some new friends as we are here. And so welcome. And that's as much stalling as I'm going to do to allow folks to come on. And I'm going to go ahead and get us started and start to share start by sharing my screen. I'm so happy that you guys are here. Uh-oh, hold on. You don't want to start off with an uh-oh. Push the wrong button, there you go. All right, and got a little ahead of myself, forgive me. And so here we go. So this is indeed the first session. And as I mentioned, this is the Delaware Prevention Leaders Workforce Academy. We're going to be delivering it virtually. And we'll talk a little bit more about what all this means. But the thing that I want to say right off the bat is that this is really intended for you and your purposes. I've had the great and wonderful opportunity of working with our partners there at the state, with Christine and with Jonathan and with Rochelle, in order to think about kind of what would work best for those of you who are leaders in prevention in your state, and kind of how can we start off by ensuring that you all are working from the same set of tools in a way that can build upon the foundation that you've already laid there in the state. And so that's really where this series came from. And so we are extraordinarily pleased and privileged to be working with you all. I want to start off by making sure that you all are connected and engaged. These training sessions are really designed to be as interactive and engaging as possible, but we're going to do much of that through the chat. There are going to be opportunities and times when we'll probably ask you to unmute so that you might be able to speak audibly with us. But please get out of this training what you need to get out of this training. And what I mean by that is, if you have questions, now is the opportunity to be able to do that with some folks who have had some great experience and I would say lengthy experience applying prevention science, not only throughout the state of Delaware, but nationally. And so it's a great opportunity to learn from that. But I'm going to ask you all, if you wouldn't mind right now, put in the chat box, let's introduce ourselves to each other, put in the chat box your name, the community that you represent or serve, your organization. And if there's a prevention initiative that you're associated with that you're proud of, please go ahead and if you can do that with 1 or 2 words, go ahead and put that in the chat as well, so that we might be able to introduce each other to who's going to be with us throughout this training series. As I mentioned, it is our great privilege to be working with the Kids Department in presenting this initiative. And part of what it is that we have as a goal of this is that you get out of this training series what it is that you really are needing. And so what we're doing is we're going to provide you with these tools. There's going to be opportunities for you to engage with us, but we're also going to be offering some of the presentation materials for your use after the training series is over, so that you might be able to have that as a resource as we move forward. And what we're asking you to do is that if you have questions, please make sure that those questions are provided to us so that we might be able to do this. We're going to talk a little bit more about how this has been designed, but I want to thank Rochelle and Jonathan and Christine for the great support that they've offered us in helping us to design and to make this possible. All of the content that we will be providing is what we've put together. And while a lot of what supports what it is that we're doing is provided through the great support from our federal friends, we have to share with you that the views that are expressed do not necessarily represent those views, policies, or positions of the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which some of their funds are being utilized to support this effort. I am grateful to have with me, it's not merely a team, it's just my friends, all of whom represent extraordinary leadership throughout the country in prevention and prevention science over the years. Dorothy Cheney, who is a lead trainer. She is the CEO and founder of Impact Solutions, and she will be joining us on many of the trainings that we will be delivering. Is an extraordinary trainer and instructor and capacity builder, and we are fortunate to have her as part of the team. Dave Closson, who supported us by making sure that we had some good earth, wind, and fire today, is also an extraordinary leader. He is the CEO and founder of DJC Solutions, and he's providing support to us behind the scenes, making sure that the technology works for us as we're delivering these trainings. But he has been a prevention leader and is providing training and capacity building support across the nation for years, and will be an extraordinary resource. He will be helping me to monitor your questions in the chat and making sure that your needs are met. And this particular session, as well as others that we will have in the future, are being led by my friend and colleague over decades, Mr. Dave Shavel. Dave Shavel is one of the premier instructors in prevention science in the nation. It is a real honor to be able to have him as part of the delivery of this training series. And so we're really grateful for the team that's going to be supporting this training series throughout. So don't miss out. Please, please do what you can to share this information to those folks that you know will that it will benefit. Invite others to the next sessions. And to be able to offer and to begin this conversation, I want to start off with a little bit of an analogy, maybe a little bit of fun. So I'm going to start off with this metaphor. If you were looking at this picture of a real shirt, if this was an actual shirt that we were looking at, what I want you to do, and believe me, there will be a point to this, is I want you to identify how many holes do you see, and put that number in the chat. I'm only going to provide about 15 seconds for this, but you're looking at the shirt. How many holes do you see in the shirt? Put that number in the chat, please.
Seeing a 5, lots of 6s. We got an 8 in there. Oh, got a few more 8s coming in also.
All right, 5, 6s, and 8s. Okay, very, very good. Excellent. Well, let me just share with you that the answer actually is 8. And let me just kind of go over for those of you who are looking at it. I don't know if we're all looking at the same shirt or not, but I want to make sure. Here, if this was an actual shirt, this will be a hole right here at the neck, right? We have 2 more holes here for each sleeve. We have a hole here at the bottom, which sometimes gets missed, right, for the body, right? And if this was an actual shirt, this represents a hole in the front and a hole in the back, and another hole in the front and hole in the back. The total of those holes are 8. And so why did I start off this way? Well, I'm starting off this way because this is kind of a reminder to me, and a kind of a fun way of reminding all of us of an adage that I have come to know. It's really from our communities that I've learned this adage, is that before you can truly solve any problem, you have to first be able to truly see that problem. And in a very real sense, all of us are here because we're in the business, we're in the profession of community problem solving. And in order to do that, we are being asked by federal resources like the Office of Victims and Crimes, and the work that they are sponsoring and helping to support across the nation by getting and establishing coalitions to address youth violence, or those of us who have been engaged with the drug-free community support program, building coalitions to come together and look at how we might be able to mitigate the impact and of drug misuse and abuse within our community, among young people and among adults over time. Or those of you who have been able to be a part of the Strategic Prevention Frameworks Partnerships for Success opportunities. These are just a few, but each of these has as a common denominator that they are asking and requiring of us who are participating in these grant opportunities to apply the science of prevention to the problems that we are seeing in our community. And in order to do that, and to do that well, we need to be able to see that problem well. We need to be able to apply that problem. We need to be able to adjust the way we view that. And so that is why this particular series of trainings have been developed. This prevention workforce series is really on behalf of how might we be able to apply these tools and principles collectively on behalf of your state and the work that you're doing within your counties. And so while we're bringing the information and the tools forward, we're asking you to bring the wealth of knowledge and information that you have of your counties, and we're going to have a real meaningful dialogue throughout these series of trainings so that we might be able to learn with and from each other, to raise the bar, if you will. To do that, one of the things that we want to share with you is that each of these trainings are being built upon each other. And so it's really important that if you're here, that you are committing to coming to each of the following trainings. And hopefully, if you've received the save the dates, you have all these dates already outlined. But here you see what the trainings are going to consist of. We're going to start today with prevention foundations. We will look at community organization and how we might be able to effectively mobilize and organize in order to be able to address community change. We're going to look at the tools that are associated with planning and evaluation, and how we might be able to apply that in an environmental approach to be able to address the population in its totality, and how might we be able to sustain those efforts over time. I'm extraordinarily proud of the training series that we're developing for you, that we've developed for you. We're looking forward to you being a part of this. And so here is what we're doing today. We're going to look at the public health approach and delve deeper into how that applies to us. Looking at the Institute of Medicine's continuum of care and understanding just kind of what that means, for us, how we might be able to utilize the Strategic Prevention Framework, or the SPF. Many of you have been exposed to that, I'm sure, but looking at the foundations of prevention, how might we be able to apply that to our prevention efforts, and how that relates to the 6 CSAP prevention strategies that are offered by SAMHSA. CSAP, which is the Center for Substance Abuse and Prevention, that is part of our federal infrastructure for the delivery of prevention. And most importantly, how we might be able to do all of that by learning with and from each other. This is the agenda for today. Please share your questions for us in the chat, and we will be able to kind of break and address those questions in real time. I can't emphasize this enough. Figure out what it is that you want and you need for yourself out of this training, and we are here to serve you. I know many of you, it is a great privilege and honor to be working with you all again. I'm looking forward to the conversation and dialogue that we're able to have. But right now, I'm going to ask my friend Dave Shavel, who will be leading us through this session for the great part of today, to kind of take the reign. I'm going to stop my sharing and turn it over and pass the baton to him. And we look forward to a meaningful dialogue and conversation with you all. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Carlton, and thank you to our team, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. Let's say I've had an opportunity to train in Delaware on many occasions, and the last one was several years ago, and I don't know if any of you were there, but it was during the winter, and it was a huge snowstorm outside, and about halfway through, the snow was falling, and you notice people weren't really looking at the presentation. They were looking out the windows to watch the snow build up and thinking of their drive home. So that's not going to be an issue today. We're in the middle of summer. So this whole training series will take us into the winter as we, as Carlton mentioned, build on the topics. And today's topic is important because everything we'll talk about beyond today is based on this prevention foundation and this overview. And Carlton talked about how we can provide this information to talk in the same language, but we recognize you all work with different communities, with different constituents, different people. Our role as prevention providers is to translate these foundation information into language that's appropriate for the different communities we talk with and we interact with. So it's important that we have this foundation, that we are talking about language here. And we know that many of you have had the opportunity to work with a lot of these concepts. What we'd like to do is, as we're walking through this, please share your experiences. Please share how you've translated some of these language to people that you work with, because one thing that we've learned in this in many years is that we don't steal from each other, but we do borrow heavily from each other. So if you have a way that works in describing these topics, please share those as we go through this, and please share them as we go through the other 4 trainings in this session. So just to get us started and kicking off, you may see what makes for a good foundation. This is Prevention Foundation. You could put in the chat box, and thank you all for contributing to that chat box. But if you think about just you're building a house, you're building a building, you're building a coalition, what makes for a good foundation? Like to see things in the chat box here. That is stable, that is not gonna, as the weather changes, I don't know if you have earthquakes in Delaware, but it's gonna be a solid grounding. So it provides a grounding for us. Anything else this foundation does? It's a solid plan. Again, it describes where in the house, where the bathrooms are. It describes where the bedrooms are, where the kitchen is. So we need that solid, and that we need to have collaboration in the work that we do. This is exactly what a foundation in prevention does. It guides all our work. It provides enough, it's strong enough to, and according with the field needs. So again, that this is a robust enough foundation that it applies to all different aspects of our work in prevention. So this is exactly why we are providing this training. It provides a location for us. So we need to translate it and make it appropriate for where we're working, in which different communities, because they're going to be different. Well, we've mentioned this several times, but when you've seen one community, you've seen one community. And so again, the foundation provides us the ability to make that translation for each community and allow us to build a team to build that foundation, because it takes carpenters, it takes plumbers, it takes electricians, it takes all of us to build a house, it takes all of us to do this prevention work. I think we've got this metaphor, don't you, Carlton?
I do, and I was all set to do your one community line, and I was on mute. You couldn't hear me.
So again, Carlton mentioned over the next a little more than an hour or so, we are going to go through each of these topics. again, public health approach, building coalitions, this thing we call the SPIF, the Strategic Prevention Framework, the Institute of Medicine, IOM. We're going to talk about diversity and talk about health equity and health disparities and talk about different types of strategies. So again, as we go through these, please share your experiences. We know we have a very experienced group here. We also have groups that may be new to the field. Please, we want to learn from each other. We're going to provide language. Please make the translation the language that's appropriate for you. And so just a discussion, and who else needs to know? We're all providers, whether we're with a coalition, we're with the state, we're with a provider that's receiving block grant or other funding, but who else needs to know about this prevention foundation? You put in the chat box, think of your work, and as you're talking about the SPIF or you're talking about the public health approach, who else that you interact with needs to know? The community members need to know. Thank you, Holly. Who else needs to know? So we need to be able to translate this to the community in ways that are community members that don't have any background in this work. Who else would need to know about this prevention foundation? So the clinicians, the faith-based politician, parents, guidance. Dion is going through the sector list. Excellent. Adults, young people, schools. And so the next question is, this is exactly, we're going through our different sectors, is to think about what aspect of this do they need to know in our interactions with them. You don't have to put that in the chat box, but as we go through this, and again, the community center, and Brenda said she's with the Latin American Community Center. Think about, as we go through each of these 6 topics for these different types of audiences, how we can translate it that's relevant for them. Again, if we're talking about the continuum of care, what does this audience need to know about the continuum of care? So think about how you're going to apply each of these concepts as we walk through them with the different audiences and participants that you work with.
And Dave, what I believe you're really sharing, what you're really talking about here is, how do we make this real for the people that we're serving with this? It's more than merely translating the language. It's about making it real for folks. I'll never forget one of the supervisors that I had one time after I attended a training like this and came back so excited and shared with her what I learned from the training. She said, "Oh, that sounds great, Carlton, but how are you going to make it real?" And that to me is exactly what it is that we're talking about here. It's the reason why these foundational and these training series is so important.
Excellent, excellent. So with that, we are going to just start with the next poll. And this is kind of a loaded question here. I'm very curious to see how you all are going to respond. But list the A, B, C, D, E, or F. You can list all 6 or 1 or 2. But put which of these do you consider yourself an expert in? And again, this is a loaded question, so I'm very curious to see who responds. And I know we have some experts in the room.
Come on, folks, don't be shy.
and I'm prepared that by the end of the series, you will all be experts in all of these topics. G, none of the above. Vanessa, you're honest. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Come on.
Okay. Well, again, I was trying to see who could help us out and provide your experiences in all these. But again, that's our goal, is to make you all experts in the translation of these materials. And again, we have about an hour left to talk about 6 topics. The beauty of this is we're not done talking about these topics at the end of today. Each of the following trainings will build on these, and we will refer to these. So thank you, Dion. You're an excellent everything.
Yeah, Dion, I was going to call you out.
And if you're an expert in BC DNF, you're by default an expert in the public health approach. Thank you. And Amy, thank you. And Brianna, please share as we go through these. Please share your experiences. Again, there's a lot of ways to talk about each of these topics. Thank you all for sharing that. So again, we're going to jump into these topics. We're going to start with the public health approach and take just about 10 minutes on each. But please, we do have time for question and answer at the end. But please add your questions and answers as we go through this, as we go through each of these topics. So again, just to get us started thinking about the public health approach, if your dog has fleas, I always think when I was learning to play the banjo, it's my dog has fleas. If your dog has fleas, what would you do? So if you could put in a chat box, what are some of the things you would do if your dog has fleas? Or it could be a cat for that matter. My daughter has rabbits. I'm just wondering, do rabbits get fleas? That's a flea bath. So you give the dog a flea bath. Again, that would take it to the bath, go to the vet, find out how bad the fleas are, if there's anything we can do, talk to the dog, soothe them. Thank you, Holly. Isolate, bathe, medicate. Good, get him medication. Good, look for the source, Jeffrey, and where would that source, as we're looking for the source, we would want to say, did the dog get it when they went out to the dog park? Did they get it from other dogs? Good, good. We're going to be talking about that a lot, looking for the source of these. And so what you're identifying, again, is the type of things we can do. We can give the dog a bath, and we can clean up the area that the dog is in. Thank you, Michelle. Treat the yard and the house. And so by virtue of your answers, you are experts in public health, because that's what the public health approach does. It looks at a problem, whether it's the measles, whether it's COVID, whether it's drug use, and we say, what are things we can do to individuals to protect them and keep them from getting involved with that, or keep them from having severe problems with that. And we change the environment. We look up for the source of the problem. We treat the yard and the house. So you are all experts in public health. When we talk about public health, we do talk about it, and some of you may have seen different versions of this thing we call the epidemiological triangle. And what this really shows is that when any problem you look at, whether it's a health problem, there's three elements to that problem. It's the agent, the host, and the environment. And many of you know this. The agent is the problem itself. So whether it's the drugs, or whether it's the fleas, or whether it's COVID, that's what we're looking at. And the agent impacts the host. So who's the individuals? Who are the people that are being, in the case of the fleas, it's our dog. In the case of COVID in the country, it's everybody. In the case of drugs, it's young people are exposed to drugs and they have the potential. Adults are also exposed to that agent. And we recognize, if you look at the right picture here, when we do prevention, and this is a theme that you're going to hear throughout this whole Academy series, is we deal with the situation where the agent, the host, and the environment come together. We're going to be talking about local conditions and developing strategies and planning and evaluation. We develop the strategies where the agent, the host, and the environment come together. We deal with the doghouse, but that's where the dog's sleeping. We also want to look at that broader environment to find out how the fleas are getting in the doghouse. So every situation, and when you think about writing grants, they always ask you do a community assessment and tell us what is the problem. In some way, they ask what are the risk factors, what are the conditions in your community, and typically what you're writing about are those conditions where the agent, the host, and the environment coming together. Youth are getting their alcohol at retailers. Youth are getting their alcohol at college parties. Youth are getting their alcohol from the home. That's where the agent, the host, and the environment come together. And so that's really the public health approach. It allows us to frame how we're going to do our prevention. And another way of looking at this, and this is a good way of sharing it with people, if you think about a frog in a pond, this is a very healthy looking frog. But what if we noticed in our pond that the frogs are starting to be sick? And we started to see the frogs aren't looking healthy. We could take individual frogs out and treat them. So we're going to treat a frog, and we could put it in a clean environment, and that's going to be great for that frog. But what about all the other frogs? We can do a second frog and a third frog, but not until we deal with the whole pond environment and find out why they're getting sick. Can we treat that environment? When we treat that environment, we're going to be treating every frog in that environment. I was going to say every dog, where I'm getting my metaphor. Every frog in that environment. So that's when we do the public health approach, we do individual strategies to treat individuals. We also do environmental strategies to impact that entire environment in which the frogs live in, because if we don't fix the environment, we can take the frog out, make it healthy, give it medicines. What happens when we put it back in that environment? We don't fix the environment. It's just going to get sick again because it's exposed to the same hazards, the same agent that it was in the first place. And so the same thing applies when we deal with alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, is we want to look at where, again, youth are exposed, what are the norms youth are exposed to, where are they actually exposed to which drugs, so we can deal with individuals, but also change that broader environment. If youth are getting vaping supplies at school and they're vaping in the school bathroom, We can deal with individuals who are vaping, but we also want to provide information, change the environment for the entire school. So that impacts all the students. And that's what the public health approach allows us to look at any given problem and be addressing both individual aspects of the problem and the environmental aspects of the problem. So again, just to summarize, when we talked about the frogs, we can do individual programs and strategies, and we can do environmental strategies that impact all the frogs in that community. And the same thing applies to, again, when we're dealing with school or we're dealing with the community. And typically you'll see in planning and evaluation, when we address this, it really is identifying those conditions in the community. Is it house parties? Is it parties in the field? Is it down by the lake or down by the shore? When we deal with those situations, those environment, then we can provide individual strategies and environmental strategies. And so just to summarize, we always say starting with why is this important? But I'd ask you, just given that frame, why is it important to you all to understand it and be able to share this public health approach with your constituents, with people that you work with? Why is this public health approach so important in our work? And if you're repeating what I've just said, please go ahead and do that. What we're looking for here is different ways of describing why the public health approach is so important. And I'll start with you, Carlton. Why, in your mind, is the public health so important in our work?
One of the main reasons is because it really changes our view and our perspective of the impact that we're supposed to be focused on, right? A lot of times we're focused on just those folks that come in through our doors and sit in our seats. But the reality is that if we're going to change the needle and move the needle, we need to be able to look at what's the population, what are things that we can do to affect the entire population. And the public health approach has that as its intent. And that's why I really value it.
Yeah, and as Vito's saying, it gets us to the source of the problem. So we don't only just deal with the problem. Okay, we treat the people that are exposed to COVID. We find out how COVID's transmitted, and we can take strategies to avoid that transmission. We can find out where the drugs are coming from and we'll talk about walking upstream to find out how we can address the sources of the problem in the first place. And it allows us, thank you, Michael, to look at it from a scientific approach. What are some of these evidence-based strategies we can use? So what are strategies we know work? What are evidence-based risk and protective factors? When we talk about the sources of the problem, we want to be addressing conditions that we know if we address them, will have an impact ultimately on drug use. So it provides that foundation for the work that we're doing.
As Jeffrey mentioned, if you don't understand the problem, you can't really try to solve that problem, which kind of goes back to the metaphor, the analogy that I started off with the picture of the shirt. If you can't see that problem right, you're never going to be able to provide the right answer.
And I love Vito's, how do you duck a punch you don't see coming? So our goal is to find out where that punch is coming from and try to address it before the punch hits. Again, lots of different metaphors we can use.
Vito, did I run into you on the street sometime, man?
I don't want to. Prevent the onset of a serious problem by reducing the risk or implementing protective factors. Exactly. That's perfect way of looking at what are those conditions we're looking for that lead to the ultimate problems that we're dealing with. And what's great about this, it applies to whether it's fleas, whether it's COVID, whether it's drug use, and for each of the different types of drugs, we can look at where the agent, the host, and the environment coming together, because it's going to be different for alcohol than it is for prescription drugs, than it is for marijuana. So we need to look at it, each community, each situation.
So David, what you're really saying is that it's more than just a catchphrase. It's one thing to say we're following the public health model approach. It's another thing to recognize that we have a responsibility as almost ambassadors for prevention science to our communities, to be able to note that this is what it is that we are hoping to bring to our communities by going through training sessions like these.
Yeah, and what's great is if you're a provider providing, I saw that Dion's providing life skills training, you're providing a curriculum to young people. That's hopefully part of a broader strategy. That's providing individual skills to those individuals. What else are we doing in the broader community to change the environment? So when youth leave that life skills class, they can live in an environment where they're not exposed to different drugs, not exposed to that agent. Excellent, excellent. So moving on to the second piece here, and this all flows together. And the Institute of Medicine created what they call the continuum of care. There's lots of ways of looking at this. We start with the river story. And if anybody wants to tell the river story, you can. Lots of ways of looking at the river story. We found this, we stole this, we didn't steal it, we borrowed from Wisconsin, this nice graphic that says, if you look on the left-hand side of this graphic, so that's looking downstream, we see there are some youth, and I think that looks like youth who are in trouble, that they want help getting out of the water. So we can jump in and save them. And that's going to be great. It's going to help those youth. But when youth keep coming down, and we're still working on the left-hand side of this picture, we're still fishing youth out of the water and saving them. Someone made the comment, we want to find the source. And so what we want to do is we want to walk upstream to find out why the youth are falling into the water in the first place. And so as we walk upstream, in the middle of the picture, you see some youth who are clinging on the rocks. They may be safe, but we want to save them too. So we want to intervene with where they're at. But finally, when we get to the right side of the picture, we can look at why youth are falling into the river. And we see that there's a bridge over the river, and the bridge is broken, and so they're falling in. The handrail may be missing. We don't know exactly. Let's find out what's broken about the bridge, and let's fix that part of the bridge. That's fixing the environment. That's where the agent, the host, and the environment come together. And so we want to do those environmental strategies. Thank you for circling each of these, Carlton. When we do those environmental strategies, fix the bridge, some youth may still fall in the water. So we want to teach youth to swim so they can swim to shore easier, so they don't get swept downstream. So it's going to be a combination of individual strategies, teaching young people how to walk across the bridge. It's going to be teaching them to swim if they do fall in, and then environmental strategies, fixing the bridge. But if we know that doesn't do it, let's put some nets. Let's do some things to change the environment so you don't get swept downstream into having further problems with substance use. So when we talk about any questions or people want to share their versions of the river story, lots of ways, but it talks about, we as preventionists, we want, as people concerned about drug use, in our case, we want to be concerned about those youth who are downstream. We want to help them. We want to help them who are starting to get involved, who are in midstream. And it's important for us then to walk upstream from a prevention standpoint and be able to say, okay, what's causing the problem? How can we change the environment that's causing it and harm people with the protective factor so they don't fall in the river in the first place?
Who's had experience with the river story, and what does the river story mean for you? Please put that in the chat.
And thank you, Michelle, for copying that, where we get stolen from Wisconsin. Excellent. Excellent. And so that's what the IOM is about. This is from the, I want to see Michelle copy this hyperlink. I don't understand. I didn't understand it. Okay, great. So again, this is the picture from the Institute of Medicine where they operationalized that river story. And what they said is, if we look on the left, the way we can deal with prevention is to start with health promotion. And health promotion are just good things that promote people having healthy lifestyles, everything from seatbelt use to driving safety to food security to what makes a good diet to exercise. If we do all these things, that will help people have healthy lifestyles and less likely to get involved with alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs in our case. We also want to move into prevention, and here's where we'll talk a little more about universal, selective, and indicated prevention. So we want to identify what are things we can do, if you think about at the bridge, to prevent people from falling in, prevent people from starting to engage in alcohol, tobacco, and other drug use. So we'll talk about universal, selective, and indicated. Then at that middle point is where, when youth do get involved with drugs, in our case, they receive a diagnosis, and if they are diagnosed to have substance use disorder, then they move into the right-hand side, which is where we move into treatment and recovery, and we help their recovery. And we know that prevention is recovery. So we can look at this continuum and look at them and say that, did I do the picture here? No. So what we can look at, by walking upstream, we can find out what are and do prevention, and then downstream is to the right here. When people do have an issue start developing substance use disorder, we can make sure they get the care that they need. And so this provides that range of services, and some of you may be involved in different aspects of this range of services. And so when we talk about prevention, we can talk about universal, selective, and indicated. So there's a range of prevention strategies, initiatives we can put in place that focus on different or the same populations, but focus on the populations in a unique way. We talk about universal strategies. These are strategies that are provided to everybody. We're not selecting out groups. So we're providing a life skills training to all fifth graders. We're not selecting them out. They're a group of fifth graders. We're putting a billboard up talking about having conversations with your kids, a social norms campaign. We're talking about providing a social host ordinance that impacts everybody in the community. Those are universal strategies. We can also then talk about selected strategies where we know what risk factors, what protective factors we want to focus on, and we start targeting specific populations that are exposed to those risk factors, then those are selected strategies. For example, one risk factor for drug use is early academic failure. So those youth who are failing in grades 4 through 6, if we provide strategies for them and we can provide extra curriculum, tutoring, any sort of support for them so that they can be more successful in grades 4 through 6, that's going to help them both academically, but also protect them from becoming involved with drugs later on in their life. So we're identifying that group who have been exposed to that particular risk factor. If we know there's a group of parents who are providing alcohol and they're hosting parties, we can target those behaviors with specific strategies. Some may be universal strategies like a law, but we can target those parents who are providing that risk, if you will, by providing those alcohol and by providing alcohol at those parties. And then so those, when we talk about selected strategies, those are strategies targeting people who are at risk or in a high risk environment. And then we talk about indicated strategies. These are strategies for people who haven't been diagnosed yet with a substance use disorder, but they're starting to experiment. So these may be brief intervention experts, screening for brief intervention for referral or treatment, those types of programs where we're making sure and identifying those youth who are using. And a good way of looking at that is if a youth is caught in violation of school policy, we want to make sure they get services so that we don't want to kick them out of school. We want to make sure that they have an assessment, that they get services they need so they can desist in or decrease their use of that particular drug, whatever they were using. The whole point here is we want to look at a range of strategies depending on the conditions around our target audience. Universal strategies, we're targeting everybody. Selected strategies, we're targeting those at risk or exposed to specific risk factors, and indicated those who are starting to use. And so another way of looking at this is most of our strategies are reaching universal. We put up a billboard, we do these strategies, we provide information. That's going to be a lot of our efforts and reach most people in our community. As we start moving down in selective and indicated, those are much more targeted strategies. Those are much more focusing on specific individuals. So again, just looking at the impact of our different strategies.
I asked the question if they could recognize what kind of strategy that they're working on, particularly Dion, and I know the work that they're doing is working on all, but I'm hoping that folks are making the connection between what you're sharing and what it is that they're already working on and they're already doing.
So the key point here is if you say you're working on a selective strategy, I always ask, okay, what is the risk factor that you're focusing with that particular population? So again, an example may be big brothers, big sisters. That is open to everybody. So that's a universal strategy. But if you're identifying youth who are exposed to at-risk conditions and they're making sure that they get that mentoring, then that would be a selective strategy for those youth. So in that case, big brothers, big sisters would be both a universal strategy, it's open to everybody, and a selective strategy because we're targeting youth who may be at risk at an early age.
Holly's suggesting that the strategy that she's working on is by making connections to readiness.
A lot of again, speaking of readiness, do people recognize that substance use is an issue? Do people recognize that we can do something about it? A lot of our universal strategies are building that readiness, is creating awareness of the problem. Think about Delta 8. We have a new drug coming out. People need to be aware that that's a problem. And so we can do universal strategies, raising the whole community's awareness. When we find out that there are stores that are selling Delta 8 and youth are going to those stores, then we can use more selective strategies. And for youth who may be starting to use Delta 8, then we would be using indicated strategies to stop their use, to work with them to start their use. All right, so Dion's talking about partnering with CBOs to provide direct services for youth that have aged out of foster care. That would be selective. They're not using, but we know they're at a higher risk. Thank you, Dion. Excellent example of a selective strategy. And then they provide drug fact presentations and bot-fin life skills. If you're providing that to a whole 5th grade class or high school class, then it's universal for that class. Excellent. The whole point here is to make sure that for whatever population we're working with, we can identify what's the best strategy for them, given the conditions that they're exposed to. That's the whole point of this, is to be able to make sure our strategies match our populations. And so just to finish the continuum of care, and when we look at the right-hand side, that's when we look at the treatment and recovery. And a lot of people will say, well, that prevention, meaning when a person's in recovery, a lot of our prevention strategies work to prevent them from starting to use drugs again. So we want to think about prevention and think about this whole continuum and think about how as a community, we're providing this whole range of services. And then the last piece here, again, when we talk about upstream, downstream, when we move to the left, that's upstream, dealing with the situation before youth become involved. Downstream is dealing with people who are engaged or experiencing substance use disorder. And one final piece here is where we can talk about harm reduction strategies. Those are strategies that are trying to reduce harm, like designated driver campaigns, or it aren't saying don't drink, but they're saying let's be safe about the behaviors that you're doing, needle exchanges, overdose prevention strategies. Those are all harm reduction strategies, and they work kind of throughout the continuum for people who are starting to use the drug, but also people who may have a more serious drug issue. So harm reduction strategies do fit on this continuum of care as well. So again, one of the points to make about the continuum of care is, as a community, we need to have all of these services. We need to have health promotion. We need to have universal, selective, and indicated prevention strategies. We need to have treatment and recovery. We need to have harm reduction strategies in our community. The challenge, though, this is just a check. If we're a community with limited resources, which one would you prioritize the funding in your community? So this is just list only one. If you just put an A, if you think that we should put most of our funding on prevention strategies, B, focused programs targeting using alcohol, so more selective and indicated strategies, put more of our resources in intervention assessment, recovery and aftercare, or E, harm reduction strategies. So if you only get to choose one, if you're in a community with limited resources, where should we put our resources? A, B, C, D, or E?
There's no wrong answer.
There's no wrong answer. Thank you, Carlton. E, B, A, E, okay.
Oh, good diversity of views.
Okay. And the point of this is there are going to be different views, and I think it's important to see intervention. Typically when people, again, this is where readiness comes in. A lot of times when you think about it, people are, when they know there's a problem and it's a severe problem, and a good example of this is the opioid overdose issue. Again, that's the issue we want to deal with. So there's a lot of money going into harm reduction strategies and treatment for people who have substance use disorder and get those opioid services to them. So again, depending on awareness of the problem, people will emphasize different aspects of it. Any comments just about this thought, your thoughts about prioritizing these strategies? And please unmute yourself and speak, or put your comments in the chat box. The point here is to say there's no, as Carlton said, no wrong answer. It's where does our community think resources need to go?
I'm really curious why you think that understanding. Why is understanding the community, the continuum of care important? So if you have a reflection on that, please share that with us.
And Jeffrey, I think I know why. Great example of the need for focus groups. I think I know you said but if you want to share why you think focus groups are so important in understanding the continuum of care.
Sure, I'll just take a moment. And I wrote that just for the reason being, if we look at the diversity of our answers of, what I would pick, not everybody else is going to pick. So with the focus group, what that allows us to come together as a collective, and just because I think harm reduction is the best strategy to go with, doesn't necessarily mean that that's right. Doesn't mean that it's wrong. But again, the more educated input we have into a problem, the better off we're able to come with a solution for that problem.
Exactly. I think what you're describing, Jeffrey, is a need for a coalition. Again, to say what do we have in our community? What's the situation? Where do we need to put our resources so we can cover this entire continuum of care as a community?
Exactly. Yep. Exactly right.
Thank you.
I love what Esther put. Maybe the same causes are still there, so individuals need to continue receiving the care afterwards to help them to stay clean. I mean, Esther is clearly looking at the continuum of care and saying, here's where we can apply our efforts and our services to be able to support somebody through the continuum of their resolution of the issues and challenges that they're facing.
Yeah, and think about it, if someone's in a treatment program, they go back to the same environment that they were using in the first place. That environment hasn't changed. How do we change that environment for them so the same factors aren't there? Exactly. Good, exactly. So it is important as a community and as a provider to understand where we are in the coalition and make sure we're providing the right services to the right audience. Excellent, excellent.
Good to see you, Esther.
So we've talked about this, and we do just want to emphasize that as we provide strategies to address the situation where the agent, the host, and the environment come together, here's where we can start to look at individual and environmental strategies. And again, we're going to spend 2 whole trainings on this: planning and evaluation and environmental strategies. We're providing this overview. This is just saying that when it's everything we've been talking about today, this is a colorful depiction of that when we provide services to address a situation where the agent, the host, and the environment come together, we want to address individual strategies. And a lot of our providers, many of you, are providing those family services. Those schools are providing individual strategies. The faith community you provide, the healthcare providers are providing strategies to individuals and families. And we also want to shape the environment by doing those environmental strategies. When we look at alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, we want to shape where youth are getting it, what laws are in place, are those laws being enforced fairly and appropriately, what are norms of the community. Again, when you've seen one community, you've seen one community. Each community has different norms. So we want to be looking at, this is not an either or, we want to be looking at both individual strategies and environmental strategies. So just another metaphor for you, example is, again, individual strategies target the knowledge, attitude, skills of individuals. Environmental strategies target that broader environment. So if you think about speeding, if we were in a room with all of you, there were how many of us, 30 of us here, I'd have you raise your hand. How many of you know how to drive? Most people would raise their hand. How many of you, when you drive, you know the speed limit? Typically, and even on your apps now, your map apps, they have the speed limit. And I'm going to see Carlton's hand here. How many of you have still exceeded the speed limit, even though you know the speed limit?
Oh my God, I feel attacked.
Carlton, you're raising your hand. We're not going to.
I'm feeling attacked.
Yeah. So the point is, we can provide knowledge to individuals. We can post speed limits all over. That's going to, again, affect individuals. But when you think about the broader environment, Vito saying he never exceeds the speed limit. Well, then you don't have to. I want to learn from Vito how to be patient driving. But we also know that in order to impact people's driving, we can change the environment. So what are some ways that we can change the environment to impact speeding? Well, Carlton, have you ever gotten a ticket? I would ask.
Yeah, I knew that was coming.
Thank you. So
maybe 1 or 2.
So speed bumps impact the broader environment. Having police enforce, again, if you know that there's a place where there's police cars are sitting, that's going to impact that's the environment impacting you. I live in Portland, Oregon, and just to let you know, if you're ever driving into the Portland airport, they park a police car on the access road, and no one's in the police car. They just have the police car sitting there because people slow down when they see the police car. Or if you know that there are certain places where there's radar enforced or airplane enforced, those are changes to the environment that impact your fines. Again, thank you, Chris. The higher the fines are, and also insurance. I know that my insurance will go up if I get caught speeding. So again, information alone doesn't necessarily change behavior. That's the whole point here. It's a combination of individual strategies and the environmental strategies that change behavior. And so the same thing applies to alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. If you can see here, this is the picture of smoke in a bathroom. So if the youth are at our school are vaping in a bathroom, what are some of the things we can do to address that, both individual and environmental strategies? So again, I'm asking you all if you want to share in the chat box, what are some of the strategies we can put in place if youth are vaping in the bathroom at school? Again, that's where the agent, the host, and the environment are coming together. I'm wondering if anybody's going to put, right, monitors, have an adult or have someone responsible in the bathroom. Monitor who goes into the bathroom, when they go into it. Excuse me, smoke detectors. Exactly. So these are all environmental strategies that are impacting, again, that environment where youth may be smoking and using vaping devices in the bathroom. There's also some individual strategies. We can provide education to youth. We provide training to teachers about how to be a hall monitor. We can provide training on how to fix the smoke detectors when they're damaged. No one has figured out how to put cameras in the bathroom yet, and I don't think we want to do that.
Yeah,
But the whole point is, it's going to take a combination of individual and environmental strategies to change this particular local condition of youth vaping in the bathroom. And so comprehensive, when we talk about comprehensive strategies, comprehensive behavior change strategies, we talk about both individual and environmental strategies. So individual strategies, again, we've talked about this, putting a sprinkler into, well, thank you, Jeffrey, for that. One example, another example of this that I used is there was one school where the youth were, after football games, they would party behind the tennis courts. There's a grassy area behind the tennis courts. And literally the school watered the lawn behind the tennis courts after the basketball games. That changed that local condition. They might have moved somewhere else, but we can address that environment. So again, we have to be creative about this combination of individual and environmental strategies. So individual strategies focus on, again, providing information to youth, to classes, to families, to increase their knowledge, attitudes, and skills. And so we know that, again, tend to be focus on single strategies. It's a mentoring program. It's a class curriculum. It's a information series. So individual strategies tend to be single sets of strategies. They're provided to individuals or groups. And we can provide dosage if we're having a class. I don't know, Dion can tell us whether it's 23 sessions of life skills. There's a lot of depth we can go into and dosage, if you will, with these individual strategies because we're working with those individuals. So whether there's a mentoring or tutoring, we can provide a lot of dosage with these individual focused strategies. And then we also have, and these are some examples of individual strategies in the domain in which they are applied in. So if you want to put in the chat box some of your strategies that may be individual, where you're providing information to individuals or groups, you're providing skills, you're providing training, those are all individual focused strategies. And while you're doing that, we'll just jump into environmental strategies. Here's where we address the policies, the systems, the norms, the regulations, the overall environment. So these are broader strategies that impact everybody. And so they can be focused on specific risk and protective factors, but when we implement them, they impact the entire community. So we know they have a greater reach. When we put a speed bump on the street, we know that's going to impact everybody that drives down that road. That's going to impact everybody. When we put our radar system on the corner, that's going to impact everybody that drives by that corner. They're longer in duration. That regardless of continued funding, that speed bump is always going to be there. Those If we have the radar, that's always going to be there. If we have laws in place, those are going to be there as long as they're enforced, and we can show rapid results. Again, when we put that speed bump in, that's going to slow down speeding immediately. When we talk about, if we're talking about retailers selling to minors and we increase the fines and we increase compliance checks, that's going to have immediate impact on retailers. So we can have immediate impact with some of these environmental strategies. And these are just some examples of environmental strategies. If at our community event, the agent, the host, and the environment come together at the alcohol tent, that's where we can do strategies to decrease the size of the cups, to decrease enforce physically the area, require people to have armbands before they get into the drinking area at that community event. We can require permitting and make sure they follow those, that their servers are trained. You can see there's depending on where the agent, the host, and the environment come together, that local condition, we can do specific targeted environmental strategies. And just to let you know that public awareness campaigns and any sort of mass communication, different funders, different organizations may call them individual strategies because we're providing information. Others call them environmental strategies because if we put up a billboard, that's reaching everybody in the community. So we have a little asterisk after public awareness campaigns or warning signs. Again, just look at the funder, look at the organization. They may classify those as individual and or environmental strategies. And so Dion's talking about working with the leaders of the ALA of the Delaware Kick Butts generation. So youth receive trainings. Those are individual strategies. To change the purchase age to 21, that's an environmental strategy, raising the requirement of have to be 21 to purchase tobacco. So that's both individual and environmental strategies. Thank you, Dion. And so here, when we talk about the comprehensive strategies, and one of our goals here was to address the SAMHSA 6 strategies. So those of you that are receiving block grant funds, you have to classify your strategies into one of these. And we'll go into these more when we talk about planning and evaluation. But when you think about it, when we do these combination of strategies to address a local condition where that agent, host, and the environment come together, we're going to have a better shot at changing behaviors around that. So if you think about the speeding, information dissemination, we want to put up the signs. We want to let people know what the speed limit is. We can have a neighborhood come together and talk about how we're going to decrease things in our neighborhood. That's a community. Environmental strategies. We put up the speed bumps. We put up the radar detection. Again, alternative activities may not be appropriate to the speeding. Education, we can educate people, and the problem identification referral is when they get caught, they have to go to traffic school. The whole point is a combination of these strategies. Just putting up a speed bump may not necessarily change behavior. It's a combination of these strategies. And the same thing with smoking in the bathroom. It's going to be a combination of strategies. Just letting youth know that vaping is harmful doesn't necessarily change behavior. But when we engage the whole school community, the teachers, the maintenance people, the administration in the process of identifying where the vaping is occurring. We put up environmental strategies, the vape detectors, the monitors. We provide alternative activities to vaping that youth at the school can engage in. Education. For those that get caught in violation, we give them an expert or referral for assessment and treatment, assessment for referral or treatment. Again, it's a combination of these strategies that are going to impact any one local condition. And then some of you may be familiar with the Drug-Free Communities Grant, or CADCA, talks about 7 strategies. I'm not going to go through these in detail now. We will cover these in planning and evaluation, environmental strategies, but the same thing applies. Whether speed limit, we're going to be providing these 7 types of strategies, providing information. The speed bumps are altering the physical design by changing the policies, how police are going to patrol that area. So it's a combination of strategies that addresses speeding. It's a combination of strategies that addresses the, in this case, the smoking in the bathroom. So just ask you, have any of you have experience or questions about, really the whole point is building comprehensive strategies to address that situation where the agent, the host, and the environment come together, where whether we're looking at the SAMHSA 6 strategies or we're looking at the CADCA 7 strategies and thinking about how we're going to, again, work as a community to change a given situation where the agent, the host, and the environment come together.
Dion shared something. Dion, would you mind unmuting and just kind of sharing your experience just a bit?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Well, just an example of how you've applied, and your example talks about both individual and environmental comprehensive strategies to address a condition. In this case, it's youth tobacco use.
Yes, we have youth that were part of the American Lung Association of Delaware, out of one high school in particular in Wilmington. And we partnered with them doing some lunch and learn tables, information dissemination. And these youth would get trained. They would go away for a weekend, get trained at a retreat to do peer-to-peer messaging. Some of the leaders were selected to go to California, where they were advocating and learn how to advocate, learn how to do a petition. One of the youth went to Washington, D.C. and talked to local government officials, some Republicans, some Democrats, came back to Delaware. They worked as a team to pull a proposal together that they presented to the governor. And as a result of that, they were instrumental in getting the law changed to age 21 for purchasing those products. So it didn't happen overnight. This was like a year of them getting what they need. And we rely, and when we do our evidence-based, we rely a lot on doing peer-to-peer messaging and training our college level youth. We're partnered with 2 colleges across the state. So they provide us with a lot of support because they can relate to the peers in a way that some of us adults cannot.
I was just checking off. I think you covered 6 of these 7 strategies here.
Good to say.
And the whole point is to get that drinking law changed, the smoking age change, took a lot of work from these 7 strategies and others working together to be able to change the environment where youth can access and how youth can access tobacco products. Excellent. Thank you for that example.
Yeah, and if I could just add one more kind of insight with respect to that, do we believe that providing information alone would have achieved the same goal?
No.
Good answer.
And also you had to have youth leaders who believe that not smoking, that there were other alternatives.
Yep.
Other alternatives to it. Now, there were some peers who enjoyed smoking that gave them a little pushback, but they were a very courageous group of young people.
What's great is that's the IOM and case. You were doing universal and selective strategies for those youth that were giving the pushback. That's more of an indicated strategy for them because they're still using the drug. Excellent. Excellent. And so what we've been talking about, someone mentioned, thank you, Dion. What someone mentioned earlier, we want to use evidence-based or science to guide us. SAMHSA, Substance Use Mental Health Services Administration, puts out a lot of information. This is a focus on prevention. It's been around for a while, but it provides a really good overview. And they talk about these prevention principles. And it basically, prevention is a continuum. We talked about that with the continuum of care. Successful prevention decreases risk factors and enhances protective factors. That's walking upstream to find out why youth are getting involved in drugs in the first place. What does that community environment look like? Prevention strategies should be evidence-based. We're going to talk a lot about that in planning and evaluation and environmental strategies. And systems of prevention services work better than isolated efforts. That's that comprehensive set of strategies it takes to change any given local condition or situation where the agent, the host, and the environment come together. And so and we will talk about more of these, we just want to introduce the concept of risk factors. And risk factors are conditions in the individual and community environments that increases the likelihood that youth get involved with alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. Protective factors protect them. And so what our role in the prevention world is to decrease risk and enhance protection. So that, again, it's weighted, we have more protection in a child's life than there are risk factors in that child's life. And so we're going to go into these in more detail as we get into the details of planning and evaluation. But the whole point is every one of you, I'm sure, in your strategies that you're involved with can identify what are the risk factors we're addressing? How are we building protective factors? And so again, life skills, and when you think about them, Deanne's talked about life skills. Again, that's resistance and social skills that we're building. When youth have those skills, that's a protective factor to protect them when they're exposed to drugs at whatever the situation is. And so just to get a sense from you, think about your particular programs or strategies you're involved with. And there may be other you can put in the chat box, but just if you can put the name of the program, and are you addressing availability? Are you addressing community norms? Are you addressing favorable parental attitudes? Are you addressing youth low perception of harm? List all that apply, or other risk factors that you know. Just want to get a sense of what kind of strategies you all are putting in place.
And you can just use A, B, C, D, or E as before, as opposed to writing it all out if it's up there.
I think Dion can put A, B, C, D, E for her programs. Yes. So Vanessa's addressing that parental attitudes. How are we addressing the parents and the message that they're providing? Thank you, Vanessa. And Vanessa, if you want to share your program here.
Yeah, I was going to just say, Vanessa, if you can unmute, can you share your
Talk to
program?
Hear You campaign.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Vanessa Stansberry. I'm with Delaware Fatherhood and Family Coalition. So as the need arises, we're just addressing additional issues that come against our youth. So we just make sure that we always talk about parents involvement as a protective factor, and then also the perception of harm as we're talking to our children, the accessibility in your household and things like that.
That's perfect. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you. Excellent. So again, the whole point is, again, in this foundations course, when we go back to our prevention principles, that we want to make sure our programs we like to say intentional about addressing specific risk protective factors for our audiences. So exactly. Thank you for those examples. So next one, again, we're going to spend a lot more time on this, but just some of you may be familiar with this, is this thing we call the SPIF, or the Strategic Prevention Framework. And what's interesting, SAMHSA put together the picture and the graphic, but really we do all this all the time. When you get up in the morning, you do the SPIF. You say, what is the assessment? What's the weather like? What am I doing today? Am I going to be on the screen? What do I need to do? Then you look at your capacity. What's my wardrobe? Do I have a raincoat? It's going to snow today. What am I going to do? Then you do planning. Okay, I'm going to these meetings. I'll wear this. I implement it. If it rains, I put on my raincoat. Evaluation, I got wet. My raincoat didn't work. The whole point is we do the SPIF in everything we do. What SAMHSA did, they did us all a favor, but they wanted to have a common language among all their grantees, whether it's prevention or treatment, to be able to say, when they talk about assessment, when they talk about planning, that there's a common language. And so what we do and what our trainings do is provide the meat to the SPIF, to the Strategic Prevention Framework, and walking through each of these. So again, this is certainly not the last time you're going to hear about the SPIF. The beauty of that we like when we work with the SPIF, it gives coalitions, it gives communities, it gives providers confidence when they say, well, how do you know that what you're going to do is effective? You can say, we're using an evidence-based process that allows us to assess our communities, understand what are the conditions where that agent host environment is coming together, and then develop evidence-based strategies, comprehensive individual and environmental strategies to impact those conditions. We evaluate it. It's all based on science. So it gives us confidence, it gives funders confidence, it gives the public confidence that we're not just making it up, we're doing this based on science.
And if we're doing it well and doing it effectively, we are doing it the way it needs to be done. We are doing that with a cultural, with cultural proficiency being at its core.
Yes.
We're doing it thinking first about the respect that's needed for the community and at the community level to be engaged in this problem-solving process. And we're doing it in a way that says, we're not here just for the day or just for the moment or just for this funding opportunity. We're doing this for the long haul. We're thinking about how this is being sustained so we might be able to achieve that change.
And that's the beauty of the SPIF. It provides a framework for us to be able to do that. And so again, I'm just going to ask here, and if people want to list all those apply, which elements of the SPIF have your organization completed in the last year? Some of you may have been working through the SPIF, whether it's through a drug-free community or a block grant or Dion, all of them. So Dion's walked through all of these.
Christine, all good, good, good. Come on, folks. Come on, folks. Let me see what you're doing. Amy, all yes. All of them, all of them, all of them, all of them, all of them.
I mean, if you're getting funding, the hope is that you will walk through all of these, so you know you're intentional
Chris,
about what you're using the funding for.
There for all. All right, we got the message.
They've realized what makes Carlton and Dave happy. So excellent. And so again, we will go through these. I'm looking at our time here, but just the key point, if you want to put any lessons learned as I'm going through these, as you've gone through them all, but assessment is where we identify is when we walk upstream. We identify what are those conditions that youth are, again, that's providing the environment where youth will become involved in alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. And it's also cultural competencies in the middle. It's also when we start to identify and engage audiences and populations who are impacted, populations who can impact each of these issues that we're dealing with. So we start our community capacity building in assessment, and we are addressing cultural competence in assessment. Capacity building, Samson didn't ask me, but I think capacity needs to be in the middle, because we build capacity to do assessment, planning, implementation, but really we build capacity to do the work. And that means engaging people, engaging diverse populations in our community, raising awareness, addressing the readiness of our community, not only to deal with the big drug problems, but also deal with these local conditions. If parents are providing house parties, we may have a community that's saying, no, we're not going to address parents. We don't, parents, we're not going to, we can't influence parents. Well, we're not ready to do that. We need to build the readiness to address whatever those local conditions are. Planning is where you have your favorite, our favorite topic, which is logic models, which is really our roadmap to say, how do we move from these identified root causes, risk and protective factors into strategies and writing objectives. We'll talk about this a lot in planning and evaluation. But here's where we apply all these principles to develop the best, most effective strategies to address our conditions in our community. Implementation is when we make sure we're delivering the strategies as we plan them, and we really implementation and evaluation go together. We don't do evaluation at the end. We evaluate as we're delivering strategies to see how they're effective. Are we reaching the population we wanted to reach? Are we engaging people? Are we having the effect we wanted to have? And then for sustainability, we need to share the results. And I think coalitions are sometimes shy or bashful, and providers about really tooting our own horns in terms of, we've done this, here's the impact we've had on our community, here's how we've contributed to community change. So sharing and reporting evaluation results is a big part of sustainability. Carlton mentioned cultural competence, it's in the middle. We want to, and we'll talk about health equity in just a second here, but we want to make sure that we're identifying and engaging populations appropriately as we walk through each element of the strategic prevention framework. And then finally, if we do all this effectively, the community will see the value of prevention. The community will want to support prevention activities. If you think about it, brushing your teeth, you prevent cavities. You don't brush your teeth once, you brush your teeth every day. If you think about population, there's always a new group of kindergartners, a new group of first graders, second graders. We need to have these prevention strategies in place on an ongoing basis. And it's not up to any one organization to do it all, one coalition. It's how do we get ownership of these prevention strategies among community partners. What to discuss in how many? In 4 minutes. But essentially, we will be covering those, the processes, a lot more as we walk through the remaining 4 trainings in this session. And so second to last piece here is health equity. We've talked about cultural competence. We'd want to look through the SPIF, the way we like to frame it is with a health equity lens. As we do our work in prevention, we always want to make sure that we're addressing health equity. So if you think about what health equity and disparities are, going back to our upstream, downstream, when we look downstream, if we see that there's a population that's experiencing more negative health outcomes than others, we can want to walk upstream and find out, why is that population experiencing more? So this is really where data drives our planning, to be able to say, are there populations, you think about it in CADCA has a Community Anti-Drug Coalition of America has a geographic health equity. So they're looking at locations, and it turns out that in portions of Appalachia, there are portions that have, through their isolation, they have higher rates of smoking. So what strategies can we target them that have higher rates of smoking to be able to address their conditions that are creating, they have higher rates than others. So we can target their conditions. If you think about it, some people have done surveys, and we find out that LGBTQ plus populations are smoking at a higher rate or vaping at a higher rate. We want to walk upstream and find out why are they vaping at a higher rate than their peers. So health disparities is really trying to look at, are there populations experiencing more severe health outcomes? How can we address strategies that impact their conditions? And again, this is behavioral health equity says everybody has the right to have quality health care. And this includes the whole continuum: prevention, intervention, treatment, and recovery. And so there's, again, these pictures talk about different aspects of, we want to move toward health equity and even justice, where everybody has the same opportunities for good health outcomes. And when we look at health disparities, we can, again, depending on the data we're collecting, we'll talk more about this in planning and evaluation, is to say, given different characteristics of populations, different characteristics of our community, are they experiencing health disparities? Meaning, are they experiencing negative health outcomes? Are we seeing more opioid overdoses among one population than another population? When we understand that, we can identify that, then we can walk upstream and find out why that population is experiencing those broader health inequities. And are there conditions that they're exposed to, whether it's discrimination or other community conditions that are leading to them? They may not have access to services, but that's what walking upstream is, to find out why this population is experiencing, again, a higher level of health disparities, negative health outcomes. And so when we put strategies in place, we want to make sure we're addressing those health disparities, and we want to make sure we're not adding barriers or any unintended consequences. So we want to be really intentional about, we're not widening or creating more health disparities when we're trying to address health disparities. And so just to provide two examples of that, if we address where the agent, the host, and the environment come together, retailers are selling alcohol to minors. We could put a strategy in place where we're going to increase the fine. We're going to require responsible beverage server trainings. We may even try to close some of those stores if they're selling to minors. That sounds like a good set of strategies, but what we've heard, and this has happened in some communities, if it's a rural community or maybe an urban community where that's the only store selling healthy foods that people can have so they can get access to their milk, their food basics. If we close that store, we're going to create a health inequity by people won't have access to those healthy foods. And we close it because they're selling alcohol to minors. So in that case, we may not want to see that the store is closed. We want to make sure that they have access to the training, and we look at what are their conditions to say, why are they selling to minors, and change those conditions without creating more health inequities by closing that store in the first place. So again, we want to look at what are the consequences of our strategies. And just one other example, again, if any of you have your examples you can share. A lot of times people will say, okay, we have an over prescription of prescription drugs. So people are they have the wisdom teeth out and they're getting 30 Percocets, 30 opioid painkillers. Do they need that many? So in some states and some places, they've said, we're going to limit just 3 days worth of prescription drugs. Well, that sounds like a good strategy, but if you think about a rural area where I have to drive, this is just a Google map of a community, but basically for this broad community, there's 3 pharmacies and they're all in one place. If I live an hour and a half away, I have to drive to get my drugs. If I need them for legitimate reasons, I have to drive an hour and a half each way to get my drugs every 3 days. That's not fair. That's creating a burden on those people that legitimately need those painkillers. So we will always want to consider, Carlton's asking, why is it important to consider that? So the whole point is we don't create more burdens or harm as we're implementing our strategies. So again, Carlton beat me to this. How do we ensure equity, or why is it important to developing strategies? And how do we ensure we're not going to create, it's a very straightforward answer. Why is it important, or how do we ensure health equity as we're developing our strategy? So how do we do that? What's one way of ensuring health equity as we do our work?
if you like, you can raise your hand as well, and you can unmute, and we can hear you audibly if you have a thought. Well, I think one of the things that's been most important, particularly in my experience, is making sure that we're including the community residents as a part of any strategy thinking, any planning that we're doing at the start of that consideration and planning, even to gain their insights with respect to how they view the issues and the challenges and the problems that we are trying to address. So we may have an assessment, but we also need to make sure that we are inclusive of the community or hearing the community's voice as we're doing that. That's just one way, I think.
And again, and Holly's saying, asking those difficult questions, including them as we ask the questions, why is this group experiencing this outcome worse than others? That's sometimes a hard question to ask for a community. But if we have a safe environment for a community to ask those difficult questions, we can get at those conditions that are causing the health disparities. And as Esther's saying, we need to do that in each step of the strategic prevention framework, as we're doing our assessment, as we're doing our planning, as we're doing our implementing. Excellent, excellent.
Can I share an example?
Please.
A couple of years ago, in looking at some of the trends across the country, like with Monitoring the Future, some things that came out with CACA and Closson, we realized that there was a high level of risk factors for youth who were part of the LGBT plus community: homelessness, addiction, violence, etc. So we partnered with the Transgender Training Institute in Philadelphia and use our funding to have our entire prevention staff do a 3-day advocacy training, because this was territory that wasn't familiar to us, and we didn't want to go in with strategies not knowing what we were doing. So we learned about advocacy, we learned the language, we learned how to use appropriate pronouns, and then we came back to Delaware and did a town hall meeting, and there were other community and faith-based and youth and just individuals who wanted to have a conversation around this. And we found out that there were organizations that were serving this group of young people that were kind of working in silos. So out of that, we ended up partnering with AIDS Delaware and the YMCA Central, who provided in-kind space. Brandywine created a 10-week summer academy. So we met on Saturdays, and we had guest speakers who were part of that community at the social level, employment level, etc., would come in and teach these young people. We talked about behavioral risk, emotional health, etc. And they graduated after the 10 weeks. And what we went in thinking, okay, we want to help them stay safe. They also wanted that. And working with the young people, their main objective was having a safe space for them to meet and make decisions for themselves. So after graduation, I'm proud to say that that young group continues to work with AIDS Delaware. They have created their own safe space. They have their own page called The Village of Delaware. And Brandywine created a community advisory board that consists of some of the same partners like PFLAG, shout out to PFLAG, where we continue to have conversations and pull our resources together to support our young people in these communities. So, and that took 3 years of doing, yeah.
Thank you, Dan. And you just covered the last topic we wanted to cover. What is the role of coalitions and prevention providers? It's to do exactly what you just described, bring awareness to an issue, talk about what is the situation, do the assessment, bring together strategies, and make sure it's sustained. You just described, we're going to skip the last section. Carlton's going to move to questions and answers and wrap this up and say that's the role of us as coalitions and providers to apply all this work, exactly as you mentioned. So thank you. Thank you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Carlton to bring us home.
Not a problem. And folks, if you wouldn't mind, those of you who are willing to come on camera for these last few moments, that would be really, really helpful. And we're appreciative of that. I want to thank you all for your participation and engagement throughout the conversation today. I want to thank Christine. I want to thank Jonathan. I want to thank Rochelle, and all those who were responsible for helping to make sure that this was able to happen. Please, if you wouldn't mind, also use the reactions. Let's give Dave a round of applause, if you will, for the tremendous kind of effort in taking what would be normally a 5-day training and condensing it in the way that he had. Here's what I'm going to ask of you. I want to make sure that we take a moment. This may make us go over maybe about 2 minutes, but if there are any questions or comments that anyone has at this time, what I want to share with you is that this was the foundational training session, right? This was intended to go over a broad spectrum of topics, but to be able to introduce those topics that we're going to go into in a bit more detail as we go throughout the series. But I don't want to leave here if there's a question, if there's a thought, if there's something that anyone has. And so if you have a question or a thought or anything of that nature, simply raise your hand. We'll call on you. You can unmute and we can be able to address that. And I'll provide just a minute or so, just 30 seconds or so to kind of be able to do that. And as you all are thinking about doing that, I want to make sure that we're clear about the next training date, which is on the 7th of September. We're going to see you all here. But before you go, don't anybody push that leave button yet. Hold on. Stop sharing your screen, whoever shared. Dave, if you could stop sharing your screen for me. Thanks so much. I'm going to go ahead and do this. What I'd like you to do is, if you don't mind, because this is all very, very important for us and important for the efforts and important to the state, go ahead and use your phone if you don't mind, and you can go ahead and put your phone right up here to get and to address the QR code that you see there that will take you to an evaluation, a very, very brief evaluation, so that we might be able to do that. And Dave Closson, if you don't mind, go ahead and put the link to that in the chat as well. So you can either use your phone or go to the chat and be able to download that, so that it's very important that you fill out the evaluation that we hear from you. I promise you, it's just a very brief evaluation report that we provided for you. Once we receive that, we're going to be able to provide you with a link for the recording of this session, so that you might be able to have it for your use. And we're going to provide you with the PowerPoint that was offered during this presentation, so that you might also be able to have that as a resource. So go ahead and click on that. Please take the opportunity to do that. If you have questions or thoughts, anything of that nature. And going once, going twice. All right, that's gone, that's gone. Folks, I want to be very respectful of your time. I want to thank you all. I want to thank my partners in crime over here. Dave and Dave, it sounds like a law firm that I'm just starting here, but Dave and Dave, I want to thank you guys for being here. When we come back together, Dorothy Cheney will be joining us as well, and joining in Dave. And that's a team up that you will not want to miss. I'm telling you that right now. I don't know who writes their comment material, but they will be bringing their game to that. But I look forward to it. Esther, thank you so much for the great work that you're doing at LACC. Dion, thank you so much for what you're doing. And Amy, it's so fantastic to see you all again. Christine, thank you for the support that you're providing from the state. Thank you so very, very much. Dion and everybody, thank you all. And with that, we look forward to seeing you on September 7th. Thank you all very, very much for a great first session. Take care.